to the Trailblazer Talks podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Hope Wilson. This podcast is designed to encourage and equip you to be a trailblazer right where you are, to help you discover your God-given purpose and bring you talks each week that will inspire you to do what you were made for. Each week, we will walk through different topics to help you grow in your life, career, and leadership. My hope is that you'll become poised for purpose and walk in that daily. I hope each week you'll feel more equipped to be a trailblazer right where you are. So let's get into this week's episode. Hey friends, welcome back to the podcast. I am so glad that you're here and I hope that you're having a great week so far. I am kind of pivoting with the topics that I thought I was going to do for this week's podcast because I had posted something on Instagram that kind of sparked a lot of good conversation, and I thought it might be good to dig a little bit deeper and actually do some type of series or mini series on this topic. So instead of doing the relationship series right now that I originally was thinking of doing, I want to pivot and let's talk about overconsumption, because I feel like this is something that I've been noticing a lot more of and kind of pinpointing in my own life, and something that I notice just as a whole that we all either tend to struggle with or feel pressure to struggle with. And it's almost like this kind of plague that we don't really realize is slowly taking over our lives. If you think about it, from the way we consume social media to the constant need for instant gratification with fast food, or how we spend our money, or just how we generally do life with the busyness and all those different things, it's all some form of like overconsumption or overstimulation and things like that. So in this episode, I really want to dig a little bit more into this and spark some different thoughts for us to help us as leaders and help us just in general so that we can start to be more intentional with this area of our life, and also find some ways to put some boundaries to this and be able to kind of slow down and just watch how we're consuming things. So if you think about it, for those who either scroll on social media, maybe you're scrolling on Instagram or maybe you're scrolling on TikTok, we're constantly being inundated with information, and it's constantly changing information. So if you think about when you're scrolling on social media, I mean, you're seeing so many different pieces of information all at once in the span of probably 2 or 3 minutes. You're scrolling and you see, top 5 things to buy on Amazon right now, or things you need for your home, or this is a piece of bad news that we just heard, or this world event is taking place, or this happy thing is taking place. So-and-so is having a baby or just got engaged, or now we're talking about this controversial thing that we all have disagreements about or whatever. And if you think about that, you're being overstimulated in the span of just a few minutes. And it's a lot of information to take in. And I'm not saying that social media is bad. I mean, I love social media. I use social media. It's a huge platform for me with my things that I do online, obviously for the podcast and everything. But even if you think about podcasts, I mean, there's so many different podcasts now. And I think that in some ways, there's so much information out there, and there's so many different ways to entertain ourselves now, or to just busy ourselves, that we're being thrown so much information at once that it can be easy to overconsume. And I think the difference too that sometimes we don't realize when we're overconsuming, if you think about whenever you sit down and have a meal, if you end up eating too much, you realize it because your stomach feels terrible. And I have done that plenty of times where the food was just so good. I was like, if I could just have a few more bites, I just want to finish this food, instead of realizing like maybe I can split it up and have it for leftovers or something like that. But whenever we overeat, we instantly feel it because our stomachs feel bad. But whenever we're over consuming information or overspending money, a lot of times we feel the instant gratification in the moment, but we don't feel the consequence until later. We either feel the consequence later from overconsumption of information because we feel anxious or depressed, or we just feel brain fog, or we feel like we can't think straight because we've just consumed so much information. Or if we're over-consuming with our spending, maybe in the moment we get excited because we just bought this new thing, or we just bought this thing an influencer told us to buy, but later our wallet feels it and we realize we didn't have that in the budget, and now we're panicking because we spent way more than we meant to this month. And it even comes that way too if we're just giving too much of ourselves to too many different things. It can happen at work if we're letting our day run us instead of us run our day. It could be so easy with all the IMs and the emails and all the different things that are coming at us to feel like, oh my gosh, I have to get back to all these people right away, and getting interrupted and things like that, and just being in so many meetings. And it's hard because some of these things are in our control and some of these things are not quite as much in our control. Like at work, obviously we have to get our work done, but we can put some boundaries and perimeters in place to help us better manage our time at work so that we don't feel so overrun with information and with things and letting other people run our day. But in other cases with work, like we don't have a choice sometimes of the meetings that we get invited to or where we have to be in so many meetings. So like I always say, it's all about balance. I'm not coming on here to berate us and tell us that we have to get off of social media and we have to stop watching TV and listening to podcasts and we have to do all these different things. But I think that we can find more balance in all of these different things to help us better manage our time and better manage our consumption so that we don't feel so frantic and worn out all the time. And if you think about how we consume information, it's causing our attention spans to become shorter and shorter. If we don't get the information we're looking for or find the point of what we're reading or doing or listening to within a span of a few seconds, we tune it out and we move on to the next thing until we get that information satisfied. And we have a harder time with being silent. We have a harder time being alone. If you think about it, our mental health is seemingly worse than ever before. And I think that's partly because of how we are treating our brains. Yes, there is mental health that has to do with chemical imbalances, but there's also mental health that has to do with what we're consuming and how we're consuming it. And I know that what we consume matters so much. I mean, scripture even talks about this in so many different places where it talks about taking our thoughts captive and not being like the world and things like that, and making sure that we're setting ourselves apart. And I think that with that comes a responsibility, especially as believers, to make sure that we are being more mindful and more intentional about what we're consuming, how we're consuming it, and how much we're consuming. And so many people related to this post when I posted this on Instagram last week. And it was just something that was a burden on my own heart because I was starting to evaluate things for myself. I feel like really since 2020, I have had like this constant brain fog and anxiety, more so than I usually do. Like I have often struggled with anxiety throughout my life, just from like my perfectionist tendencies and things like that. But I realized it got heightened during the pandemic and during 2020, whenever all of a sudden we were getting all of our information on social media. We were suddenly being inundated with so many different news events, so many different opinions, thoughts, takes, whatever you want to call it. And it just wore us out. And then we're working harder than ever before and all these different things and how we're spending our time. And I've just noticed for myself that I tend to get more anxious whenever I'm being fed too much information from too many different sources about too many different topics. And it's hard to hold space for all these different things. And I was listening to something the other day and I thought it was an interesting take about this. And it was, I don't know the person's name, but it was just a video that popped up in my feed from another Christian who was kind of talking about the fall with Adam and Eve in the garden and eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and how that opened us up to seeing the pain and the suffering and all the different things in the world. And they were talking about how they were like, I don't feel like God intended us to know as much as we know, to be able to instantly see so many different things going on in the world all at once. And that's kind of what has happened with social media. Is before we might have just known what was going on in our area of the world, and we would get different bad news at different times, but now we're getting 50 different messages of different things going on in the world. And it's not to say that we need to put our head in the sand and never know the bad things that are going on in the world, but I think it speaks to how much we can handle at one time, and the fatigue and the almost compassion fatigue that we feel just from consuming so much news and so much media and so many opinions and just things like that are bombarding our brains. And so I think we have to find balance with all of that. I think we have to pray and ask God to help us to know what we can handle and what our capacity is, and to be passionate about the things we're passionate about, and to be informed, but not at the sake of being over-informed. I think it's so easy nowadays to go on these different rabbit trails and go on these different rabbit holes of consuming information because we just want to know everything. And I think our need to know everything can also be a curse at times, because we go off on these rabbit trails, we listen to all these different people, and we don't really know who's the expert sometimes on different topics, and information is constantly changing. But our need to know is hurting us at times. And I think it's great to be informed, but I just think we have to be so careful of how much we're consuming and what we're consuming. And I think we have to pay attention to the amount of information that we are taking in, because I think we're addicted to information. And this can happen in all different areas. I mean, too much of a good thing can sometimes be a bad thing as well. I think if we are listening to too many different sermons at a time, or too many different voices, or too many different podcasts, or watching too many videos or things like that, constantly switching gears and just inundating ourselves constantly with information, it can become too much. And so I think we have to limit ourselves, and we have to really evaluate this. So that's a lot of information. That's a lot of stuff. And I know I'm talking about not having too much information, but I feel like this is a good conversation to have. I feel like this is healthy and something that we need to evaluate, and we need to really understand so that we can live healthier and more peaceful and more intentional lives, and kind of slow down our pace and really be intentional with this part of our life. And hopefully this can help us with getting rid of the brain fog. It can help us with feeling more peace in our lives, and just really having space to hear God speak to us and have space to live healthier lives. So how do we start combating overconsumption? How do we start evaluating this for ourselves? I thought through a few of these different areas, and so I'm going to talk through those. And if you want to take notes, great. Or if you want to just make mental notes of this, that's cool too. But I want to encourage us, and this includes myself, because this all started with me realizing things that I needed to evaluate for my own health and my own self. But I would encourage us to take a step back and really evaluate these areas that we might be prone to overconsumption in. I would ask ourselves these questions of, am I spending too much time on social media? Or am I spending too much time researching news, events, etc., like whatever those rabbit holes are? Or am I maybe watching too many different sermons or TED Talks or whatever? Am I maybe reading too many books at a time? And am I allowing myself space to kind of hear God for myself and study the Bible for myself instead of listening to, 10 different sermons in 1 week? Am I maybe spending too much money because I was influenced to buy XYZ thing? Do I need to maybe mute some people or unfollow some people temporarily because, I'm spending too much because I follow these different Amazon influencers or whoever? And asking ourselves the question, do I really need as much as I'm allowing myself to have? I think these questions can be great starting points to really help us with better understanding, like, what's our starting point here? Where do we need to make changes, and where do we need to set up boundaries? I know for me, with the whole spending thing, that has been something that can easily be a problem for me, because I am just used to being able just to buy whatever. But with the current economy, I don't need to just buy whatever. I need to be more intentional about how I'm spending my money. And so I've put different boundaries in place for myself to help me think through what I'm spending more and not just constantly hitting buy or like things like that. So like I removed Amazon off of my phone. I deleted the app, I logged out so that it's harder for me if I need to buy something from Amazon. It's harder for me to just buy it right then. I have to actually think about it now if I want to buy it. And usually by the time I go through all the effort to like add it to my cart from somewhere and I'm not logged in, I usually realize like I don't really need this right now. It helps me to take pause and think about it more. I think it's also good to set boundaries for how much time we're spending on our phones and with our screens. I see so many mom accounts talk about how they're helping their kids with screen time, and we limit screen time for children, and we even are cautious of what TV shows they watch because we don't want them to be overstimulated or overwhelmed or whatever. But then we allow our own selves to be constantly overstimulated by social media, by TV and things like that. And so I think we have to evaluate some of those things for ourselves and put some boundaries in place to help us be able to think more clearly and get more comfortable with slowing down and those types of things. And then I think with the addiction to information, we also have to look at the aspect of pride in our life. Why do we want to know as much as we know? Why do we feel the need to constantly know everything and constantly feel the need to inform others of everything? I think we have to take a moment to kind of humble ourselves with some of those things and take a step back and really evaluate some of those areas for ourselves to see, are we over consuming information in a way that is unhealthy, that's causing us to have anxiety, that's causing us to have just this prideful aspect of feeling like we have to prove everyone wrong or right or whatever it is. So those are the different areas that I have kind of identified that I think could be helpful for us to start with. And we can dig deeper as we move through this series. But I think as we do these things, we can intentionally determine how we correct those areas so that we are not over-consuming and that we're giving our brain space to think and process and therefore have peace. And we can control our need for this instant gratification and our need to know everything about everything. And I think with that, it gives us more margin, it gives us more space, and it gives us more peace and calmness in our lives so that we're not being overstimulated and we're not being in this place where we feel the need to overconsume. So I hope this was helpful. I hope that if you're feeling some of these areas that this was helpful for you, and it gives you permission and peace to just know that you can trim down some of these areas of your life and know that you don't have to subject yourself to constant overconsumption. So I hope this is helpful, but we'll be back next week with another new episode talking about this topic a little bit more and some more ways that we can combat this in our lives to help us be better leaders, better friends, and just overall better people in our lives. And if you like this episode, I would love if you'd share it on social media, if you'd share it with family and friends. And also, if you aren't already subscribed to the show, be sure to subscribe to the show and you'll get the episodes sent right to you each week. It'll let you know whenever there's a new episode. And if you haven't, I would love to also have you leave a review and a rating because it helps the show get found by more people to help people be stronger leaders and be trailblazers right where they are. Thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you back here next week.